Joining us now from Washington is Senator Mike Lee, Republican from Utah. He introduced the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act in the Senate this year. He is also the author of the brand new book called The Freedom Agenda: Why a Balanced Budget Amendment is Necessary to Restore Constitutional Government. And Senator Lee, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Well, House Republicans yesterday passed the Cut, Cap, and Balance bill, which calls for slashing billions in immediate spending, caps future spending, and proposes a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. What is your reaction to the vote?
Well, I'm elated. I'm ecstatic over this. I was the lead sponsor in the Senate of the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act, and we're looking forward to taking this up in the Senate now. We think that before we raise the debt limit, we need to address the underlying problem, and we need permanent, structural, and binding spending reform before we extend the credit of the United States government once again.
Now, critics are saying that once this bill moves along to the Senate, that it is not going to pass. Do you believe that to be the case, or do you believe otherwise? And what kind of bipartisan support do you have in the Senate?
Well, you know, critics like to use that argument, in part because critics have a hard time addressing and refuting the need for this on the merits. The American people overwhelmingly support a balanced budget amendment, and that's why you don't have people attacking the bill head on. They're content instead with saying, well, I don't think it can pass. We'll see whether it can pass. They made similar arguments about the House of Representatives version of the bill, and it passed last night. I'm going to push it forward. I've been working to try to get some of my Democratic colleagues to sign on to it. I don't have any yet, but I believe we will get some.
Now, President Obama said that if the bill should get to him, that he would veto it. He has said that we don't need a balanced budget amendment. What is your response to that?
Well, my response to that is history tells us exactly the opposite, that we do need a balanced budget amendment. When the president says Congress just needs to do its job rather than amend the Constitution, I can't help but think about the fact that that hasn't worked. That's how we got to the point where we are now, where we're almost $15 trillion in debt. We need Congress to bind itself. We need it to be bound constitutionally, not just in this Congress, but in subsequent Congresses. And the only way to do that is to amend our law of laws, the only law that can't just be repealed by a future Congress, and that is through an amendment to the Constitution.
Will the U.S. go broke without this amendment?
Well, I think the United States, without this amendment, will continue its pattern of perpetual, massive scale deficit spending. We're now borrowing more than $1.5 trillion every single year. This on top of the almost $15 trillion debt that we've already amassed. And so at some point we will reach the natural mathematical limit on our borrowing power. It's at that moment that the most draconian, abrupt, and severe cuts would have to be made. And so whether you're most concerned about protecting national defense on the one hand, or entitlement programs on the other hand, you should want the balanced budget amendment to pass, because it's the only way we can shore up these programs from the catastrophe that would result when we finally do reach our natural borrowing limit.
To what extent could changes to entitlements hurt the GOP in 2012?
Well, look, there's no question that any talk of changes to entitlement programs is difficult. People rely on these programs. They've been relying on them for decades. And no one wants to cause anyone else in America difficulty. And at the same time, we would be cruel. We would not be doing our job if we didn't acknowledge what, for example, the Medicare trustees have already acknowledged, which is Medicare is headed for insolvency. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. Some say that it'll occur in the mid-2020s. Others say that we could be only 5 or 6 years away from that insolvency. So we have to address these questions, and we need to address them in a bipartisan way. And I think a balanced budget amendment is a great way of bringing both sides to the table and making sure that the discussion happens.
Now, you touched earlier on the public support for the balanced budget amendment. Now, a Mason-Dixon poll earlier this year shows that 65% of the American people support the idea of a balanced budget amendment. Why do you think politicians are so reluctant to wade into the debate, with you obviously being the exception?
Some are reluctant to wade into this because a balanced budget amendment would make politicians less powerful. It would make Congress as an institution less powerful. Anytime an institution has access to an unlimited pool of money, especially if it's a lawmaking institution like Congress, it will be made more powerful as a result of that. But we need the balanced budget amendment to save the American people from this power. Every time we expand the power of the federal government, we run the risk of interfering with the individual liberty of Americans.
Now, Senator Mitch McConnell's proposed debt ceiling compromise would raise the debt limit and give power to President Obama to raise it even higher down the road. You have announced your opposition to this idea. How come?
Well, I am firmly opposed to that idea because I believe that this isn't much different than just raising the debt limit without any significant strings attached. That's basically what we would be doing. The fact that we might be calling it something else, the fact that we're saying, well, we're not raising it, we're just authorizing the president to raise his own debt limit, will not be lost on the American people. And in any event, it won't change the way we spend money. I think this is an approach that we should avoid like the plague. And I'm firmly opposed to it, and I'm dedicated to doing everything in my power to resist it.
Now, President Obama wants a compromise by Friday in advance of the August 2nd deadline. How do you see the debt debate playing out?
Well, you know, it's difficult to predict at this point, but I will say that the Cut, Cap, and Balance Act is not just the best proposal because it would fix the problem permanently with permanent structural binding reforms in place as a condition of raising the debt limit. But it's currently the only proposal on the table. This is the only show in town. This is the only proposal that's been reduced to legislation that has passed one house of Congress and has substantial support in the other body of Congress and also has considerable support from the American people.
Senator Lee, you're one of the founders of the Senate Tea Party caucus and rode Tea Party support to win election last year. Are you concerned at all that the outcry over the debt debate isn't what it was during the debate over whether Obamacare was going to be passed?
Well, the outcry is significant regardless of what people might want to compare it to. The people are understandably concerned. They understand that this is something that affects everything from job creation to what they pay and their interest rate on their home mortgage and their auto loan, their ability to finance every aspect of their lives, their ability to finance their own businesses. They are concerned about this, and we owe it to the American people to handle this matter responsibly in a manner that won't continue the barbaric practice of burying our children and our grandchildren, some of whom are not yet born, under a mountain of debt by spending money that we don't have.
Senator Lee, last question real quickly. In a Wall Street Journal op-ed this week, Michael Boskin wrote that if President Obama gets his way on tax increases as part of the debt debate, that our marginal tax rates will skyrocket to 70% and that subsequently everyone would be working primarily for the government. Does President Obama want the U.S. to be a socialist country?
Well, I won't try to speak for the president. Only the president can know what's in his own mind. But I will say that it's with good reason that many of us in Congress, myself included, have expressed an unwillingness to pursue tax increases. As the president himself acknowledged just a couple of years ago, a down economy is no time to raise taxes. It's the very worst time we could do that. Every time we raise taxes, we kill job creation because we need to rely on the same people who would be paying those higher taxes to invest that money, to place it at risk in order to create jobs. When we raise taxes, we chill that activity and we kill jobs. We can least afford to do that right now. And so as I explained in my new book, The Freedom Agenda, the solution is not increased taxes. The solution is restricting Congress's borrowing power to put America on path toward financial stability and to restore freedom to individual Americans around the country.
All right, again, the book is The Freedom Agenda. Senator Mike Lee, Republican from Utah, congratulations on the book, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.